My name is Sarah Elizabeth Blackwood. I'm 35 years old, and this is the story of how I burned down the empire my family spent generations building, because they never thought I was worthy of it. They handed the keys to my brothers. They erased me from the narrative. I was the obedient daughter in the corner, the one who smiled politely at boardroom meetings, nodded through insults, and stayed silent as they turned my life into an afterthought. But what they didn't realize is I was watching, learning, planning. This is a story about betrayal that cut through bloodlines, revenge that simmered until it was ice cold, and the price of being underestimated by the very people who raised me. They tried to write me out of the legacy, so I wrote the ending myself. And when the dust finally settled, it was my name etched in gold, not theirs. The voicemail came on a Tuesday morning, while I was having coffee in my Manhattan apartment, the same apartment my mother had co-signed for when I first moved to the city 15 years ago. Her voice was cold, businesslike, nothing like the woman who used to braid my hair and tell me bedtime stories about brave princesses who saved kingdoms. Sarah, this is your mother. Effective immediately, you are no longer part of Blackwood Industries. Your access has been revoked, your office cleared, and your company credit cards canceled. Expect a call from our lawyer regarding the return of company property and the enforcement of your non-compete agreement. Do not contact me, your father, or your brother about this matter. All communication will go through our legal team. The line went dead, and I sat there staring at my phone, watching the steam rise from my untouched coffee. 20 years of my life, 20 years of building what was supposed to be our family legacy. Dismissed in a 90-second voicemail. I had given everything to Blackwood Industries, my 20s, my social life, my chance at a normal relationship, my dreams of having my own family. While my college friends were traveling Europe and dating and finding themselves, I was learning supply chain management and negotiating with manufacturers in China. While they were posting engagement photos and baby announcements, I was working 18-hour days to prove I deserved my place at the table, not just because I was Richard Blackwood's daughter, but because I was damn good at what I did. My hands were shaking as I replayed the message, trying to understand what had triggered this nuclear option. 3 days earlier, I had been in the boardroom presenting my proposal to expand our textile manufacturing into sustainable fabrics, a move that would position us ahead of industry trends and appeal to environmentally conscious consumers. The presentation had gone too well, apparently. I had spent 6 months researching, developing relationships with suppliers, and creating a comprehensive business plan that would increase our profit margins by 30% while reducing our carbon footprint. My father had nodded approvingly, and even my younger brother Marcus had seemed impressed, though he rarely showed enthusiasm for anything that didn't involve his trust fund or his latest sports car. But I had noticed the look that passed between my mother and Marcus, the same look they had shared when I was promoted to VP of Operations last year, the same look they exchanged whenever I achieved something that threatened their carefully constructed hierarchy. Margaret Blackwood had built her identity around being the power behind the throne, the strategic mind that guided my father's decisions, and she had groomed Marcus to be her heir apparent from the moment he could walk. My success wasn't just an inconvenience to their plans, it was a threat to everything they had built their lives around. The lawyer called exactly 3 hours after the voicemail, his voice smooth and professional as he explained that I was being terminated for gross misconduct and violation of fiduciary duty. When I asked for specifics, he cited unauthorized contact with competitors and misappropriation of company resources for personal ventures. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The unauthorized contact was a brief conversation with Elena Rodriguez, CEO of Green Thread Industries, at a charity gala where she had complimented our recent sustainability initiatives. The misappropriation of resources was apparently my use of company time to research sustainable manufacturing, the same research that had led to my proposal to expand into eco-friendly textiles. They had twisted every professional interaction, every late night spent developing strategies for the company's future, into evidence of betrayal. But I knew the real reason for my termination had nothing to do with misconduct. It had everything to do with the fact that the board had loved my presentation, that several members had suggested I should be considered for the COO position that would be opening up next year, and that my father had actually seemed proud of me for the first time in months. Marcus had been promised that position since he graduated from Harvard Business School, and my mother would burn the company to the ground before she let me interfere with her golden boy's trajectory. I spent the next week in a haze of disbelief and fury, alternating between wanting to fight the termination and wanting to walk away from my toxic family forever. My father didn't return my calls, and when I showed up at the house in Greenwich, the security guard, a man I had known since childhood, awkwardly informed me that I was no longer welcome on the property. The humiliation was complete. I had been erased from the family narrative as efficiently as they had erased me from the company roster. But as I sat in my apartment, surrounded by 20 years of awards and commendations from the business I had helped build, I realized that my mother had made a critical error. In her rush to eliminate me as a threat, she had forgotten that I knew every secret, every shady deal, every corner they had cut to build their empire. She had forgotten that I had been the one handling the offshore accounts, managing the supplier relationships, and maintaining the documentation that kept their questionable business practices from coming to light. Most importantly, she had forgotten that I had been preparing for this moment my entire life, watching and learning from the master manipulator herself, absorbing every lesson in corporate warfare and family politics. Margaret Blackwood had taught me well, perhaps too well. The first phase of my revenge was simple. I activated the dead man switch I had created years ago, when I first realized that my position in the family was always going to be precarious. Every email, every financial record, every document that could expose the company's illegal activities was automatically copied to a secure server that only I controlled. The bribes to city officials to fast-track permits, the tax evasion schemes hidden in our international subsidiaries, the labor violations in our factories overseas, all of it meticulously documented and organized. I had never intended to use this information against my family, but I had learned from watching other family businesses implode that survival required preparation. Now, sitting in my apartment with my laptop open and years of evidence at my fingertips, I felt a cold satisfaction wash over me. They had taught me that family was a business, that loyalty was a luxury we couldn't afford, and that power was the only thing that mattered. I was simply applying their lessons more effectively than they had ever imagined possible. The student had become the master, and the master was about to learn a very expensive lesson about underestimating the daughter she had tried so hard to diminish. I started with the offshore accounts, the ones Marcus didn't even know existed. My mother had been siphoning money from the company for years, hiding it in Cayman Islands shell companies and Swiss banks to avoid taxes and keep the funds away from my father's more generous impulses. She had trusted me with the account numbers and passwords because she needed someone with legitimate access to company finances to make the transfers look legal. With a few keystrokes, I transferred every penny back to the company's main accounts, then sent an anonymous tip to the IRS about the suspicious financial activity. The beauty of it was that the money trail led directly back to her, and the timing of the transfers coincided perfectly with her decision to fire me. When the investigation began, it would look like she had panicked and tried to cover her tracks after removing the one person who could expose her. I could almost picture her face when she realized that the $10 million she had been hoarding for her retirement had vanished overnight, replaced by a paper trail that would keep federal investigators busy for years. She had always prided herself on being 3 steps ahead of everyone else, but she had never considered that I might be 4 steps ahead of her. The second phase required more patience and precision. I reached out to Elena Rodriguez, the CEO of Green Thread Industries, the woman whose brief conversation with me had been cited as evidence of my disloyalty. Elena was brilliant, ambitious, and absolutely ruthless when it came to business. Everything my mother thought she was, but with actual ethics and a genuine vision for the industry's future. Over lunch at a quiet restaurant in Midtown, I explained my situation and made her an offer she couldn't refuse. I would provide her with detailed intelligence about Blackwood Industries' operations, supplier relationships, and strategic plans, along with a comprehensive analysis of our weaknesses and vulnerabilities. In exchange, she would hire me as her chief strategy officer and help me launch a coordinated attack on my family's business from the inside. Elena's eyes lit up as I outlined my plan. She had been trying to break into our market segment for years, but Blackwood Industries' established relationships and deep pockets had kept her at bay. Now, with my insider knowledge and her resources, we could systematically dismantle everything my family had built. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about taking their crown and wearing it myself. Within 6 months, Green Thread Industries had poached 12 of Blackwood's key employees, including our head of manufacturing and our best sales director. Elena offered them signing bonuses and salary increases that my family couldn't match, especially once the IRS investigation began freezing assets and scrutinizing every financial transaction. The employees who came to GreenThread brought with them client lists, supplier contacts, and intimate knowledge of our operational procedures. We used that information to undercut Blackwood's bids on major contracts, offering better terms and faster delivery times because we knew exactly what their limitations were. My mother tried to fight back, but she was playing defense while dealing with federal investigators, angry board members, and an increasingly erratic Marcus who had started drinking heavily as the pressure mounted. She had trained me to be a strategist, but she had never taught me to know when to retreat. That was a lesson I had learned on my own, and now I was using it against her. Every move she made, I had already anticipated and countered. Every strength she tried to leverage, I had already neutralized. She was fighting a war on multiple fronts against an enemy who knew her every weakness, and she was losing badly. The third phase was the most personal and the most satisfying. I had maintained friendships with several members of the country club circuit, the social elite who formed the backbone of my family's business network. These were the wives and daughters of our biggest clients, the women who organized charity galas and fundraising events where million-dollar deals were made over cocktails and small talk. I had been one of them for years, attending their luncheons and serving on their committees, building relationships that my mother had always dismissed as frivolous social climbing. But I had understood something she never did in our world: perception was reality, and social standing was just another form of currency. Over carefully orchestrated conversations and strategic leaks, I began to reshape the narrative around my departure from Blackwood Industries. I wasn't the disgraced daughter who had been fired for misconduct. I was the ethical whistleblower who had discovered corruption and been silenced for trying to expose it. The story spread through the social network like wildfire, enhanced by the very real IRS investigation and the suspicious timing of my termination. Within weeks, my mother found herself frozen out of the social circles she had spent decades cultivating. Charity organizations quietly removed her from their boards, and longtime friends stopped returning her calls. Marcus, meanwhile, was cracking under the pressure of actually having to run the company without me to handle the details he had never bothered to learn. He had been groomed to be the face of Blackwood Industries, the charming heir who would glad-hand clients and attend ribbon cuttings while the real work was done by others. But with half of our experienced staff gone to competitors and the other half distracted by the ongoing investigation, he found himself in over his head. I watched from my new office at GreenThread as he made one costly mistake after another, alienating clients with his arrogance and making strategic decisions that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the business. The golden boy was tarnishing before everyone's eyes, and my mother was powerless to stop it. She had spent so much time and energy removing me from the picture that she had forgotten to actually prepare Marcus for the responsibilities he would inherit. Now, as contracts were canceled and stock prices plummeted, she was learning the hard way that blood wasn't always thicker than competence. The heir apparent was proving to be nothing more than an expensive liability, and the company was hemorrhaging money and reputation with every passing day. The final phase of my revenge was the most devastating because it struck at the heart of everything my mother valued most: her legacy and her family's reputation. I had spent months building a relationship with investigative journalist Rachel Chun, providing her with carefully curated information about the fashion industry's labor practices and environmental impact. Rachel was working on a series of articles about corporate responsibility and had been particularly interested in companies that marketed themselves as family-owned and traditional, while engaging in questionable practices overseas. When she published her exposé on Blackwood Industries, it was thorough, well-researched, and absolutely damning. The article detailed our use of factories with documented safety violations, our employment of child labor through third-party contractors, and our systematic avoidance of environmental regulations in countries with lax enforcement. But the most damaging part was the personal angle, the story of how the company's own daughter had been fired for trying to implement ethical reforms, and how the family had chosen profits over principles. The article went viral, picked up by major news outlets, and shared thousands of times on social media. Within days, Blackwood Industries was facing boycotts, protests, and congressional inquiries. The family name that had once opened doors was now toxic, and my mother's carefully constructed image as a respectable businesswoman was in ruins. As I sat in my corner office at Green Thread Industries, watching the news coverage of protesters outside the Blackwood Industries headquarters, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction, certainly the cold pleasure of seeing my mother's empire crumble under the weight of her own arrogance and short-sightedness. But there was also sadness for what we could have been, for the family business we could have built together if she had been able to see me as an ally rather than a threat. I had loved that company once, had genuinely believed that we were building something meaningful and lasting. But my mother had taught me that love was a weakness, that family was just another battlefield, and that survival required the willingness to destroy those who stood in your way. She had created a monster in her own image, and now that monster was using her own tactics against her with devastating effectiveness. The irony wasn't lost on me in trying to eliminate me as a threat. She had actually created a much more dangerous enemy than I had ever been as her daughter. The student had indeed surpassed the master, and the master was about to lose everything she had spent her life building. 6 months later, Blackwood Industries filed for bankruptcy. The combination of legal fees, fines, lost contracts, and damaged reputation had made the company unsustainable. My father, who had always been the more passive partner in the marriage, finally found his voice and filed for divorce, taking half of my mother's remaining assets with him. Marcus entered rehab after a very public breakdown at a charity gala, and the tabloids had a field day with photos of the former golden boy being escorted out by security. My mother, the woman who had once commanded respect and fear in equal measure, was reduced to selling the Greenwich house and moving to a small condo in Florida, her social connections severed and her reputation in ruins. The family business that had defined our lives for 3 generations was gone, dismantled by the very person they had tried to cast aside. I had taken everything from them: their money, their company, their reputation, their future, and I had done it using the skills they had taught me. The princess had saved the kingdom, just not in the way my mother's bedtime stories had promised. Sometimes the princess had to burn down the castle to build something better in its place. The most beautiful part of my revenge was that it wasn't just destructive, it was constructive. While Blackwood Industries crumbled, Green Thread Industries flourished. We absorbed their best clients, hired their most talented employees, and took over their market share with a commitment to ethical business practices and environmental responsibility. I had built something better than what my family had destroyed, something that would actually make a positive impact on the world. My mother had taught me that business was war, but she had never learned that the best wars are the ones where victory creates something valuable, rather than just destroying the enemy. As I signed the papers to acquire the intellectual property rights to Blackwood Industries' sustainable textile research, the same research that had led to my firing, I couldn't help but smile. The proposal that had cost me my family had become the foundation for something greater than anything they had ever imagined. My mother had always said that revenge was a dish best served cold, but she had never mentioned that it could also be profitable, ethical, and deeply satisfying. The daughter she had tried to erase had become everything she had pretended to be, and so much more. You know what's funny? They never see it coming when a quiet girl chooses herself. She cried in silence the night he left. No closure. No goodbye. Just vanished. Like she was never enough. Like she was disposable. He thought he broke her. And for a while maybe he did. She stopped eating. Stopped talking. She even stopped looking in mirrors. Because every time she did, she saw the girl who loved too deeply and lost herself in the process. But here's the part he didn't expect. She wasn't going to chase. She wasn't going to beg. She was going to rebuild. Quietly. Brutally. Completely. She cut her hair not to look pretty, but to feel power every time she saw her reflection. She went back to the gym not to get him back, but to never need anyone to carry her pain again. She stopped answering texts, started answering her own questions. She didn't want explanations anymore. She wanted evolution. Because you know what the most dangerous thing in this world is? A woman who learned to live without the person she thought she couldn't breathe without. She healed in silence. While he posted stories with new girls, she built chapters of her own. Chapters filled with growth, purpose, and peace. One day he saw her again. Different. Untouchable. Radiant. He said, "You've changed." She smiled. "Yes," she said. "I buried the girl who loved you, and I became the woman who loves herself." Revenge? No. It wasn't petty. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was her silence, her peace, her unbothered glow. Because the best revenge is showing them they didn't break you. They woke you up.